Chapter 2. Discovery of Cliff Palace. Richard and his brothers find more great cliff dwellings in Mesa Verde and sell their first collection to Denver Historical Society. Baron Nordenskjold visits Alamo Ranch, stays to excavate some of the major cliff houses. He acquaints Richard with the rudiments of archaeology. Alamo Ranch attracts a swarm of visitors, among them Julia and Bert Cowing of Brooklyn, New York. With every changing season, the ranchers of Mancos Valley move their cattle to get best grass and water. The Dolores River in Dove Creek country was favored for some of the larger herds during most of the year, but a number of cattle owners wintered their stock as far south as the San Juan. The hard winters always presented a problem. Snow drifted deep in the Mancos and Montezuma valleys, making grazing there impossible. The sheltered slopes and small canyons of the mountains to the east offered a refuge for a few of the ranchers. Wetherills wintered their cattle in Mancos Canyon and the side canyons of Mesa Verde. Although the Utes regarded this region as their own, they assured the Wetherills the Alamo stock could graze there unmolested. Mancos Canyon was a winding gorge, half a mile wide and 1,500 feet deep. The shallow, narrow river twisted through it between deep banks with towering cliffs of sandstone rising sheer on either side and talus of huge fallen boulders and sand mounds at their base. A leaden sky, heavy with snow, could add to or just emphasize the lonely, utter silence. Crows flapped about the cliffs, and a hawk, circling high, slowly gliding on the air currents, was an occasional hunter. Long-eared rabbits were alert to sudden death from above. A change in the wind's direction caused a sighing among the fir and pinon of the mesa's summit, and from far below brought a faint murmuring of water as the river slipped between ice-frosted banks. At intervals, the stillness would be raveled by the screech of an unseen jaybird. Time had no beginning and no end. Day turned to night, to be succeeded by day again in an endless cycle, but time itself was meaningless. Yesterday was the same as tomorrow. 500 years ago could have been a moment of yesterday. Only the seasons changed. The cliffs and the canyons were changeless. A small thing occurred to mar this atmosphere of timelessness. In the river gorge, close to the mouth of Johnson Canyon, Richard, in 1884 or 1885, built a cabin, a winter camp, where he and one of his brothers stayed while watching the cattle. They took turns, but most often it was a job for Richard and Al. Sometimes John or Clayt Wetherill, or Charlie Mason or John Etheridge would appear, leading a pack horse with provisions to keep the cabin hands supplied for another month. Whoever came usually stayed for a day or two. Often at such times Richard or Al would ride off into the canyon for hours, searching for mounds or cliff dwellings. They found many, Al making the first discovery of importance, the ruin they called Sandal House. Charlie Mason, the husband of Sister Anna, was company for Al on a number of these excursions. Once, after finding Cliff House rich with relics, they brought a small collection of pottery and stone implements back to Alamo Ranch. Benjamin Wetherill either sold or gave this collection, the first of which there is any mention, to the wife of a Denver stationer and bookseller named Chain. Years afterwards, Al Wetherill wrote of these first discoveries. There were 6 of us, the 5 brothers and Charlie Mason, actually involved off and on in the explorations of the region. My father never was well enough to give more than a moral support and deep interest in the proceedings. Richard, the eldest, was always spokesman for the group, acting in the capacity of head of household when my father was not able to do so himself. Because we were reared in strict Quaker style, we never questioned Richard's authority. Standing in the cabin door, watching the cattle graze, Richard could look out across the river and see the mouth of the Cliff Canyon nearly opposite. It was one of the deepest, most impenetrable of all in Mesa Verde. Thus he was standing one day when approached by his friend Ekowitz. For years, the Ute had lived in a hut close by. The old man's eyes followed the directions of Richard's gaze, and then he spoke. He would tell his friend a secret, he said, a thing unknown to white men. Deep in the canyon, and near its head, were many houses of the old people, the ancient ones. One of those houses, said Ekowitz, high in the rocks, is bigger than all the others. Utes never go there. It is a sacred place. Richard was intrigued. How could he find it? He demanded. But the Ute shook his head as though he had already said too much. I could tell you, but I warn you not to go there. When you disturb the spirits of the dead, then you die too. That was all Ekowitz would say. During the winter of 1887, Richard and Al entertained a visitor at the winter cabin, Dr. Comfort. The doctor had come from Fort Lewis on the promise that he would be shown some of the cliff dwellings. Early one morning, Dr. Comfort and Richard rode to Johnson Canyon, while Al, alone and on foot, forded the river and started in the opposite direction into Mesa Verde. 61 years later, Al described his adventure. On this particular day, we weren't hunting stray cattle, but were on lookout for ruins. I went up and around and across the canyons and mesa tops until nearly dusk. I was about all in, but I thought I'd make just one more climb and up across the top to see what there might be in the branch canyon, which I passed earlier in the day. By the time I had reached the other canyon, I was through. I was too tired to be interested in new canyons or what they might have in them, and besides, it was getting dark, and I had a long way to go back to join the others. I decided to follow the bed of the branch canyon as being the most direct route to the meeting place. Al had walked half a mile then, looking up through a glimpse in the heavy brush and the treetops. He said he was startled to catch a partial glimpse of the cliff dwelling that filled the recesses of an immense cave. I stood looking at the ruins in surprised awe. I had hoped to find some unexplored dwellings, but this discovery surpassed my wildest dreams. I gauged the steep walls of the canyon against my tired legs in the ebbing daylight and slowly turned away. They had waited for hundreds of years for the moment of discovery. I met Dr. Comfort and Richard near the mouth of the fork. They had become anxious and started out to look for me. I told them about the ruins, and we intended to return promptly to see how extensive they were. But the pressure of the ranch duties once more had the priority rating, and we were unable to do anything about the new find at the time. Al Wetherill was a truthful man, untroubled by hallucinations. Nevertheless, his discovery, when alone and stumbling with fatigue, would be enough to stir up an unending controversy years later.
And I feel like New York City. Get me to the fun.